Good evening all and welcome. I would like to extend a very happy belated birthday to Miss Liberty 1776. I hope you had a wonderful day. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. In 2016, when my daughter was 3, I took her to a park we often frequented. It was a warm, sunny day, a weekend, and the park was unusually busy. I'm an active mum. I usually run around and play with my daughter. But that day, with so many kids and parents crowding the playground, I decided to sit down for a moment. Just one moment. But even then I wasn't distracted. I wasn't reading, scrolling, or chatting. My eyes never left her, I made sure of that. I was 21 at the time. Young and petite, barely 5 feet tall and 115 pounds. People often mistook me for a teenage babysitter rather than her mother, but I was fiercely protective of my daughter, especially because her father was never involved. She didn't know him. I didn't bring men around her, and aside from my brothers, she wasn't used to being around men at all, especially men with facial hair. They frightened her. What happened next? I can still see it perfectly. It was like something out of a nightmare. I knelt down, held her tiny hand, and told her softly, "I'm right here, baby. I'll be watching." She nodded and turned towards the swing set just a few steps away. Halfway there, she turned around. Her golden hair flipped in the sunlight as she looked back at me with the biggest, brightest smile and waved. And there he was. A man. Brown skin, beard, casual. Too casual. He moved so fast, so effortlessly, like he belonged there, like he had done this before, and he grabbed her hand and began walking away towards the parking lot. My brain took half a second to catch up, half a second too long. Then I was sprinting, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I caught up and grabbed her hand with both hands and pulled her back. "Just what the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice was trembling as I stood my ground. The man froze. His eyes widened like he hadn't expected to be stopped. He stammered, fumbling over his words. Is this your daughter?" She came up to me. She said she was scared. I couldn't find her parents." "Liar." He pointed vaguely towards a random part of the park, but his words were sloppy and unconvincing. My daughter was terrified, clutching me like her life depended on it. I knew. And then he bolted. But he wasn't alone. Out of the corner of my eye, on the opposite side of the park, I saw someone else take off. A white guy, clean-shaved, jumping into a different car. 2 of them. 2 men, 2 cars, 2 stories. I called the police immediately, trying to hold back the panic in my voice as I reported what happened. And what they told me still haunts me. This was a common child trafficking technique. 2 people, usually different genders or races, work together to snatch a child. One grabs the child, and if they get caught or someone reports them, the description goes out. A brown man with a beard took off in insert car model, but by then the child is gone. They've already swapped. The second person no one's looking for takes the child in a different car under a different description. The police chase the ghost while the real kidnapper disappears. It was too close. Way too close. If I had looked away for even a second, if I had been texting, reading, talking, scrolling, anything other than watching, my daughter would be gone forever. I wouldn't have been fast enough. I wouldn't have known. My advice, never let your guard down. Never assume you're safe, not even for a second. Because that 1 second can change everything. I was 17 at the time, working at Topman in a rough part of London. It was a chaotic day, and the store was packed with people because of a sale. I was used to the area, gang activity, stabbings. It was home. Nothing really fazed me. I worked alone most of the time, stuck on my side of the store while Topshop was on the other. I was buried at the tills trying to process endless purchases when a man came up to the counter. He looked distressed, maybe in his 50s, wearing a black puffer coat and joggers. "I lost my phone," he says, his voice shaky as he points towards the sale rack to the right. I didn't think much of it. I followed him over to the racks, two pushed close together, and crouched down to look. There it was. His phone was sitting perfectly in the middle of the racks. Almost too perfectly. It was odd. There's no way it would have fallen like that, but I picked it up and handed it back to him. "Thank you, you're my angel, my angel." He kept repeating this almost theatrically. "It's fine," I said, already returning to go back to the till. But then he asked, "How can I repay you?" "You really don't have to. It only took a second." I smiled and tried to brush it off. "What time did you get off work?" Something about the way he asked, I didn't like it. I lied and said 3 o'clock, even though I was closing that night, and it was only around 10 a.m. at that point. "I'll see you after work," he said. His face had gone completely straight, no more theatrics. He turned and walked out the store. I tried to shake it off. A weird encounter, but nothing to worry about. The day dragged on. By the time closing came, it was around 8 p.m. My colleagues and I locked up and began leaving together. I was trailing behind as usual. I was pretty quiet and didn't socialize much with them, and as I stepped out, I saw him. The man! He was sitting on the bench watching us. My stomach dropped. He wasn't just passing by, he was waiting. I tried to keep walking close to my co-workers, but I felt his eyes lock on me. As I passed, he stood up and began to move towards me. "I want to take you for a drink," he said, stepping closer. "To thank you." I can't. I have to get back and I'm only 17. I turned to leave, trying to act calm, trying not to make a scene. But before I could take another step, he grabbed my arm. "Come with me." His grip tightened as he pulled me towards an alleyway. Panic set in. I glanced towards the alley, and there, stationed outside, was a black SUV. The door was open, and a man was standing there holding it open. "Come on," he said, pulling harder now. My mind was screaming at me to run, but I was still trying to be polite, trying to reason with him. "Please, I have to go, I really can't." But his face changed. His expression went dead. He yanked me harder, and I could feel the strength in his grip. Fight or flight kicked in. I threw myself to the ground and dropped like a dead weight, and he let go. I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted to the bus stop, my heart pounding, my legs barely keeping up with the adrenaline. I didn't look back. When I got to the bus stop, I called my boyfriend. He came and picked me up, but I was too shaken to tell him everything. I never called the police, I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that nothing really happened. But I know. I told my mum a few years later, and when I saw the horror in her eyes, I finally realized how close I came to disappearing that night. People trafficking is something that happens a lot in London, and with over 8.5 million people there, I'm sure it goes unnoticed by many. If I hadn't have dropped to the ground, if I hadn't have fought back, I wouldn't be here to share this story with you. I work as a bartender, and I've had my fair share of unsettling experiences with customers over the years, but this one shook me to my core. For context, at the time I was 23, and I'm female. It all started on a Friday night, and I was working a double shift at the restaurant. Around 11 a.m, a delivery guy came in with a package I had to sign for. I smiled, signed the slip, and wished him a good day. He seemed nice enough, just another quick, forgettable interaction during a busy shift. The day dragged on, and by the evening the place was packed. Every seat was filled, and the parking lot was overflowing. I was running around like crazy, taking orders, mixing drinks, and trying to keep up with the rush. Sometime during the chaos, a man sat down in the bar. I didn't think anything of it, just another customer. He ordered a drink, then an appetizer, and eventually dinner. We made small talk, but nothing out of the ordinary. "How long you worked here?" he asked casually. "A few years, I've worked my way up," I replied, pouring another drink. "Do you like it here?" he asks, just your typical bar conversation. At first it was all normal, and that's when things started to shift. The questions became a bit more personal. "Do you have a boyfriend?" I smiled politely and said I did, hoping it would be the end of that line of conversation, but it wasn't. He kept steering the conversation back to me, complimenting me, telling me how beautiful I was every few minutes. "Can I have your number?" "No, I don't think my boyfriend would appreciate that," I said, still trying to laugh it off. "Okay, what's your last name then? Maybe we can be Facebook friends." I kept declining, but he was persistent, and something about his tone, it wasn't flirty, it was insistent. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Actually came in this morning to drop off a package. You signed for it, remember? I came back just for you." I froze for a moment, but forced another fake smile. "Oh yeah, I remember now," I said, playing it off, but inside my heart was pounding. At this point I was so uncomfortable that I excused myself and went to the back to vent to my manager. She told me to just keep an eye on him, but that we'd deal with it if things got worse. Eventually, after what felt like forever, he paid his tab and left, and I breathed a sigh of relief. But that wasn't the end. We closed at 10 p.m, and by 10:30 the place was dead. I was finishing up, cleaning the bar, wiping down glasses, and that's when I looked up. My heart stopped. The front of the restaurant was lined with large windows that faced the parking lot. And there he was, the delivery guy. He was standing by his car, but he wasn't just standing, he was clearing out the back seat. The doors were wide open, and he was leaning in and out, moving something around and shuffling bags. Why was he cleaning out his back seat? It had been almost 4 hours since he left. Panic set in. I ran to get the manager, dragging her from the front so she could see for herself. "He's still out there," I whispered, my voice shaking. My manager's face went pale. She offered to call the police, but I told her not to worry. I'd call my boyfriend who lived 5 minutes away. I didn't want to make a scene if it was just some weird misunderstanding. When I called my boyfriend, I could barely get the words out. He immediately knew something was wrong, and he said he was on his way. My manager made me sit in the office until he got there. I didn't want to be anywhere near those windows. I couldn't see what happened next, but I'll never forget what my boyfriend told me. When he pulled into the parking lot, the delivery guy was just sitting in the driver's seat of his car waiting. My boyfriend, who's extremely protective and doesn't mess around, walked straight up to the guy's car and knocked on the window. "Roll it down," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The guy did, but what happened next was the scariest part. He began mumbling in another language, acting like he didn't speak English. But my boyfriend wasn't having it. "Don't pull that crap with me. You've been talking to my girlfriend all night. You speak English just fine. You need to leave. Now." The guy kept mumbling and avoiding eye contact, but my boyfriend wasn't backing down. "You got 15 seconds before I pull you out this car, and you never leave the parking lot." And the guy finally pulled the car into drive and sped off. I was on the edge for weeks after that and couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I even considered quitting. But the part that still keeps me up at night, why was he still in the parking lot for 4 hours? And what the hell was he doing in his back seat? Back in August of 2021, I was a freshman at Queens College in New York City. I'm from Chicago, and I only went home during week-long breaks. I'm now a senior set to graduate this spring with a degree in film studies. But what happened during my first year still haunts me. Orientation day had me on edge. I was nervous and unsure if I'd fit in or make any friends. But by the end of the day, I'd met a group of classmates who seemed cool, and we naturally formed a little friend group, and things were looking up. That's until I met Dylan. From the moment I saw him, I knew something was off. He was awkward, trying too hard to be funny, always saying the most random, cringy things that no one laughed at. At first, I figured he was just a socially awkward film nerd, but as time went on, I realized there was something profoundly wrong with him. Dylan wasn't just weird, he was unsettling. Weeks passed, and Dylan became more annoying, constantly butting into conversations, bringing up unrelated topics that only he cared to talk about, and he had this way of making everyone uncomfortable. But we tolerated him. After all, we were just starting college, and no one wanted to be the person who pushed someone out. But then things got darker. One night I was having dinner at the cafeteria with a few friends, Alex, Eric, and Mary Kate. We were venting about Dylan, laughing about how bizarre he was, when Mary Kate said something that sent chills down my spine. "You know, he's been following girls back to their dorms." I froze. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, a bunch of people have been talking about it. They think he's dangerous." My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe it was just a rumor, but something about Dylan had always felt off. And things were about to get worse. A few days later, I was at lunch with my group when Dylan sat down at our table. There was an empty seat and he just slid in without asking, and I sighed under my breath. Here we go again. He began talking, rambling about how people had been giving him weird looks. I was barely paying attention, but then his tone shifted. "Why are you guys acting like children and ignoring me?" Something inside me snapped back. I'd had enough. "Listen, none of us want to talk to you. You're annoying. You interrupt our conversation, and honestly, we're tired of it. Just leave us the hell alone." Dylan's face then twisted with rage. His eyes locked onto mine, and before I could process what was happening, he lunged. His hands were around my neck. I felt his fingers tighten, squeezing the air out of me. His face was inches from mine, and in a low, furious voice he hissed, "What's wrong with your tiny human brain?" Everyone in the cafeteria went silent, and I could barely breathe. My vision blurred as I gasped for air, and I thought, this is it. Then out of nowhere I felt his grip loosen. A group of guys had pulled him off me, slamming him down on a nearby table. One of them growled, "You're not going anywhere till security gets here." My neck throbbed with pain as I stumbled back. My friends, Peter and Mark, rushed over, asking if I was all right, but I was too shaken to speak. We went straight to the dean. When we walked in, her eyes went wide. She didn't wait for an explanation and just handed me ice packs, her face pale as I recounted the story. Then security confirmed it with the footage. We watched the playback of Dylan lunging at me, the guys pulling him off me, holding him down until security arrived, and the dean promised to keep me updated on the situation. But the nightmare was far from over. The next morning I woke up to an apology email from Dylan. "Hey, I just wanted to say how truly sorry I am for what I did. I went too far and let my emotions get the best of me. Do you want to be friends again?" Friends? I felt sick. The apology was hollow, just another attempt to worm his way back into my life. I deleted the email without response, and then a few days later the dean emailed me. Dylan had been expelled. I was relieved. Finally it was over. And thus ends the story. But it doesn't. Thanksgiving break rolled around and I went home to Chicago. I was trying to put everything behind me to enjoy some peace. It was around 10 p.m. I was in my bedroom when I heard a soft knock at my window. My heart stopped. I lived in that house my whole life, and no one had ever knocked on my window, especially not at that hour. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the window, pulled up the shade, and there was Dylan. I yanked the shade down and sprinted to the living room where my parents were sitting. "Dylan, he's outside." My mum looked concerned but skeptical. "Are you sure, honey? Maybe it's just your imagination." I dragged her back to my room and lifted the shade, but of course he was gone. My mum shook her head. "See, there's nothing there. You've been through a lot. Maybe it's in your head." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. How did he get to Chicago? How did he find out where I lived? What did he want? I'm not sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I'm less inclined to believe that. Dylan was really there, and I don't know what the hell he's gonna do with me. Back in 2019, when I was 21, I was working at a place called Coconut Car Wash in Flagler County, Florida. I didn't go to college because I couldn't afford it, and while my boss wasn't the friendliest guy, he paid me decently and I got along with almost everyone. Except one guy, Nicholas Sess. He was 25 when he started working there. At first he seemed fine, polite, made eye contact when we talked, nothing seemed off. We exchanged social media and I didn't think much of it. But that changed. By March his behavior took a turn. He started touching me. At first I tried to convince myself it was accidental, brushing my arm when he walked by, tapping my shoulder unnecessarily. But it happened too often to be a coincidence. He'd apologize with a creepy little grin, but I wasn't dense, I knew he was lying. Then he began to DM me constantly on Instagram, asking me out over and over. I politely declined at first, but he wouldn't take the hint. He just kept pushing, just one date. Come on, I'll make it worth your time. I was beginning to feel unsafe. I tried talking to my boss, hoping he would help, but instead he looked at me like I was annoying him and said, "You need to handle your own problems." No help, no support. I was alone. My other co-workers too busy, my parents emotionally distant, and therapy out of the question. I couldn't afford it. And Nick, he got worse. His messages turned obsessive, almost possessive. I'd wake up to long, rambling DMs about how we were meant to be and how no one else could love me like he could. He sent me disgusting love notes, sometimes even leaving them in my locker at work. But then the real nightmare began one night after work. I had just gotten out of the shower, wrapped my bathrobe, and the shades of my windows were still open. And as I turned to close them, I froze. Outside, under the dim glow of the streetlights, Nick was sitting on his bike staring up. For a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but he was really there, and the second our eyes met, he pedaled away, vanishing down the street. How did he know where I lived? I never told him. I never hung out with him outside of work. I felt sick. I grabbed my phone, blocked him on everything, even his number, and emailed my boss and told him I was quitting and explained why. Of course he didn't care. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. The next morning I woke up to a flood of Instagram DMs from an account I didn't recognize, but of course it was Nick. He made a new account. The messages were disturbing. Long, incoherent rants that didn't make any sense, filled with bizarre declarations of love and threats disguised as promises. He did the same thing on Snapchat and I blocked them. But this was before Instagram had the feature to block someone from making new accounts, and he kept making more. For 2 days it didn't stop. I was losing my mind. I felt like I was being hunted, and no matter what I did I couldn't get away from him. And then it escalated. That night that I heard a knock at my front door, my heart stopped. I walked to the door, my stomach twisting in knots, and I peeked through the peephole to see Nick. He was standing there, shifting from foot to foot, his face half hidden in the shadows. I didn't make a sound. I hoped he'd think I wasn't home, even though the lights were on and my car was in the driveway. But then he spoke. "I'm not leaving till you open the door. We'll have problems if you don't." His voice was calm, and I panicked. I grabbed my phone, called 911, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I stayed on the line with the operator, whispering everything that was happening. Minutes felt like hours. When I finally saw the flashing light of a police car pull up, I almost cried with relief. 3 officers stepped out, and I watched through the peephole as they approached Nick. I couldn't hear what they said, but after a few tense minutes they came to my door. I let them in and told them everything. They found out where Nick lived and warned him to stay away, but it didn't stop him. The next morning he was back, and a patrol car caught him biking towards my house. This time they'd arrested him. At the station in the interrogation room, Nick confessed to things that made my skin crawl. He'd been watching me for months. He had been outside my house multiple times collecting photos of me that I had posted online. He even admitted to trying to figure out my routine. "I just wanted to be close to her," he said. I felt like my world was crumbling. Why? Why did he think that after everything I'd want anything to do with him? He was sick. Nick was charged with felony burglary of a dwelling and misdemeanor stalking. He faces up to 15 years in prison and $11,000 in fines. But even prison doesn't give me peace, because one day he'll get out, and when that day comes, I can't help but wonder, will he come looking for me again? Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice, sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner, and I invited our 4th roommate in room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying that she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. How they would be fighting in less than a day. I smiled and told Sam that she just made a bad first impression, and that maybe we could invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked and the door opened. A short petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation, and she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C since we were sharing a bathroom. I learnt her name was Nellie. We were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was odd. We were both in our 20s. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate. I got to know Nellie. I kind of felt bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and has since had an accent and a lisp. I assumed she was bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was shy and claimed to have no hobbies or friends, but I figured that, since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked her if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her, like I was doing a good deed. My first 2 weeks of the program went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, made friends, and got along well with my roommates Sam, Bella, and Poppy. And I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy, because we sat together in lectures every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison. I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers, and ask me where I was going. One night I left my room to the grocery store when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed, and she hurriedly put on her sandals and a neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle, Nellie silently following close behind me. Eventually I found everything I needed, but Nellie said she wasn't buying anything. After I paid for everything, we began to exit the store, and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt, and he looked in my bags, confirming I hadn't stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the 4th time as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone or with friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to think anything to the contrary. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning I shuffled into the bathroom and saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spiraling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on the top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only other person with a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet and then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business, but that didn't really explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I returned from class, it was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom, and I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again, toilet paper, hair and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper. I knew I had to say something, but I didn't want to confront Nellie directly about this awkward topic, so I sent a passive, non-aggressive text. "Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please?" I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she sat with me in class. Nellie never acknowledged the situation. She still opened her door with mine, hung out with me and sat with me in class. For the next 2 months I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. Nellie would clog the toilet, I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she'd do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed I decided to confront her. "Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilets and you need to stop, and if you do it again I'm going to report you." I pressed send as I walked into class. I decided I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet, and as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, and I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall. I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. I was happy that the holiday break was soon, and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked. She stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December, and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly sweet, rotting yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet, so for 2 weeks I avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later, when all of our food started to rot immediately after buying it nearly. Bella, Sam and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot, when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to smell the hallway outside Nellie's room and returned a minute later coughing and gagging. We contemplated about what might be causing the smell when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll. As we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everyone fell silent. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up, grabbing Nellie's arm and guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darted rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment towards Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh, and part of me felt bad for Nellie. At least Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, and she bought me scented candles for Christmas, and when I returned to the apartment I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined, and she asked if I would go to lunch with her the next day. I had no plans, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much. So despite everything, I wanted to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things I could talk to her about. Attempting to break the awkward silence, I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loved to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First? Wasn't that like a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "I do this a lot, actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin, I barely put my ear against it, and I can hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and a little scared. Nellie started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded. I didn't know how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fists on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she wasn't from Sri Lanka, and I apologized even though she definitely told me she was. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We're going to go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but you'll have fun." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide, and her mouth seemed to open more than usual. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to be alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and stuttered out a disingenuous, "Maybe." Nellie leaned back, slowly rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it would be. The rest of our lunch was silent. We got back into the apartment, I said goodbye to her and went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. The next day I did laundry, went shopping, and by 2 p.m. I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, head down, eyes turned up, staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated the question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floor, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints close to the door. Trying not to puke, I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged Nellie. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it. I'm going to report you." I pressed send. I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt so gross I went to our shower room next to the bathroom, but Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain, and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her, so I laid down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack underneath. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as she did this for 5 minutes. Then, Nellie began to rapidly knock on the door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, and called again, all the while rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door. The shock of it made me stumble back onto the bed, and then as suddenly as it had started, she stopped, her feet still visible under my door. My phone buzzed, and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at her text. The cockroach screamed, "Why do this to me? Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation," the doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach's legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach. I was terrified. As Nellie began to knock and chirp, I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything. Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared her away. We met up and talked about what happened before going to bed. And that night, I barely slept. I was simply too scared. I woke the next day anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its conditions suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Regan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles and inspect each row as she passed. I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eyeline, and she sat next to me, with her mouth twisted up in a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move, and worried that any tiny shift might cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things. Nellie asked where I was going, and I lied to her and said I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch and I stood in the kitchen with the door open. "You weren't at the cafe." Nellie's eyes darted up to me. She was looking at the knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond. She just stared with her head tilted, mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid she'd use the knife on me. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding, and she stood there 10 minutes before leaving. Later on, I walked to the library, and I froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see her staring at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me with her threat still fresh in my mind. I moved to a different spot, but she followed. Wherever I moved, she followed, and I was too scared to be in an isolated library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace. I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out, and Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. She nonchalantly told Nellie to piss off. I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie, inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me I'd be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore, and I needed to get away. I went to Reagan's apartment. She was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her, and as I held back tears, my phone buzzed. Sam texted me that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back, but I couldn't just abandon Sam, so I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan I'd return soon. I walked to the apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I go to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the door to reveal a truly demonic sight. In the kitchen, huge amounts of congealed blood and orange liquid pooled across the floor leading beneath our table, where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and head missing. I felt sick. The windows didn't open, so it didn't get in there by itself. Nellie had either found this bird, brought it into the kitchen, or she had decapitated a living bird and put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and it's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board and things moved fast. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen and Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily, in case Nellie tried to take my life and they needed to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her and thought that moving would stop her obsession with me, but that was an incredibly misguided thought. I was happy that my new roommates were normal, and no Nellie incidences happened for at least 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profiles. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding any related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they became. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. That's when Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat, and I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking towards me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't sit next to me," I said. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and walked to the store. I forgot to grab a card, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle, and she followed. I walked to another, and she followed, matching my pace until I went into another one and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. They offered to call the police, but I declined, gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me, as I had to report Nellie. But since I had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk me to class, I caught her staring at me from across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with a crowd towards campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan, past the building and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe, and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I moved the rock and we began walking again, I turned my head to speak when Nellie jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words can't explain how terrified I was. Nellie let go immediately and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes wasn't human. Reagan told me to run and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her crossing. We stopped and Reagan leaned against the fence and I bent over and covered my mouth in an attempt to not vomit. After a while, we continued our walk in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie stood at the bottom of it. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaking. Reagan nodded, and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. She stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay. You can go first," Reagan said while we were smiling at Nellie. I was shaken how composed she was, even more shocked that Nellie listened. We sat down in class and Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving this seat for his friend, so Nellie left. I didn't pay any attention to the lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified, while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie crap, and I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled no matter what. The next day I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board, and they raised the issue to the disciplinary board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Regan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses, and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop, blood, clogged showers, and toilets, and the stalking. The next day I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I reported was factual, but they didn't think Nellie had any malicious intent, so they would grant a no-contact order, but Nellie would not be expelled. I was perplexed by their conclusion, and asked them what Nellie had said about all this, but they refused to tell me anything. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe Nellie was given my full report, and knew everything that I said, and knew all the witness names. The school had put us in danger, yet they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care that they were going to prioritize a predator. So, with no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The work had tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to do that. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help, and she would never stop stalking me. My sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class and standing next to me in hallways and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by saying they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order, and they never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates, and in them, new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from her. They looked terrified. They looked like me. Having incidents happen weekly, and having to see Nellie daily, made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in fight or flight or freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do. I became a sunken-in, miserable and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge, a natural result of the boiling rage I felt. Now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror she imposed on me, I wanted Nellie to suffer the exact same way she'd done to me. I know if I had just grown a pair in these early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighed heavily on me to know that I had played a large part in my own suffering. And no matter what I share, I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off her. I still have daily night terrors, and I don't go into new situations, I don't speak to new people, and I don't make friends. I'm unkind to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life ever again. Revenge came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed second year. But despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie's failing. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you would like a birthday shout out or all the cool perks that come with being a patron or a member, you can follow the links in the description to find out more. But that's it from me. If you like more content, links on screen now. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.